The security intercom chimed at 9 on a Tuesday night. The camera feed lit up the dark marble island in my kitchen. Through the pixelated screen, standing in a steady downpour, was my mother. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks. She held a plastic bakery container, trying to shield a cheap sheet cake from the rain. I watched her shivering at the wrought iron gates of a house she did not know I owned. She pushed the call button again. Her voice crackled through the speaker. "Ava, please let me in." I pressed my thumb against the mute icon. The screen went black. To understand why I left my own mother standing in the rain, you have to rewind exactly 5 years. Before I go back to that day, welcome to Sophia Vengeance. If you have ever been the person your family treated as optional, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I read every single one. Make sure to subscribe if you connect with this. My name is Ava Smith. I was 28 years old, standing under a weeping willow in a rented botanical garden in Birmingham, Alabama. The late June heat pressed down on my shoulders. I wore a second-hand dress I bought for $150. The tulle scratched my ankles. I looked down the grassy aisle at 74 white folding chairs. They sat in perfect straight rows. They were empty. Not just a few of them. All of them. Liam stood at the altar a few feet away. His hands were clasped in front of him. A single bead of sweat traced the line of his jaw. He looked at the empty rows, and then he looked at me. His eyes did not hold pity. They held a quiet, smoldering promise. He reached out and fixed the broken clasp on my faux pearl necklace. His fingers were steady. Just 150 miles away in Atlanta, my entire bloodline was checking into a luxury boutique hotel. My mother, my father, my aunts, and my cousins. They were adjusting their sequined flapper dresses and pouring champagne for my cousin Jessica. It was her 30th birthday, a Great Gatsby-themed weekend. My family had held a silent vote and decided Jessica turning 30 was a spectacle that required their presence. My wedding was a scheduling error. They did not even pretend to be conflicted. There was no tearful phone call apologizing for the double booking. That morning, my phone vibrated on the vanity while I was trying to pin my hair up. It was a text from my mother. It did not say she wished she could be there. It did not say she loved me. It read, "Send pictures. Jess is about to cut the cake." A single dry leaf blew across the grass and hit the leg of the chair in the front row. It scraped against the metal. It was the chair with a small piece of cardstock taped to the back that said, "Mother of the Bride." I closed my eyes and listened to the wind move through the empty seats. To understand how 74 chairs end up empty, you have to understand the math behind my family. The Smith family economy did not run on love or loyalty. It ran on a very specific currency controlled entirely by my Uncle Richard and Aunt Susan. They owned a chain of car dealerships stretching across the South. Their lots were filled with high-end imported vehicles, and their bank accounts were insulated by decades of ruthless markups. Their daughter, Jessica, was the crown jewel of their empire. Jessica did not have a job. She drove a pristine white luxury SUV that Uncle Richard gifted her for graduating from a 2-year online program. She complained about the leather seats getting too hot in the southern sun. She spent her days getting expensive keratin treatments and browsing high-end boutiques. Her profession was simply waking up and existing as Aunt Susan's child. My parents, Diane and Tom, lived in a different reality. They resided in Mountain Brook, Alabama, a zip code where your worth is measured by the logo on your car and the pristine condition of your front lawn. From the street, my parents looked like they belonged. They had the brick colonial house and the manicured hedges. Inside the walls, they were drowning. They lived in a constant suffocating state of silent debt. My father worked processing mid-level insurance claims. My mother spent her days maintaining an illusion. The illusion required funding. That is where Uncle Richard stepped in. I was 16 years old the first time I saw the transaction. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I walked into the kitchen and found Uncle Richard sitting at our granite island. He wore a crisp golf shirt and a gold watch that caught the overhead lights. My mother stood across from him. Her posture was rigid. She wiped down a spotless counter with a microfiber cloth. The kitchen smelled of bleach and lemon polish. Richard reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He clicked his pen. The sound echoed in the quiet room. He wrote a number, tore the slip of paper, and slid it across the smooth stone. It was the mortgage payment. I watched my mother look at the zeros. Her shoulders dropped. The relief washed over her face, but it was a humiliating kind of relief. She picked up the check and forced a bright, brittle smile. "Thank you, Richard," she said. Her voice was thin. Richard took a sip of his iced tea and nodded toward me. He did not say, "You are welcome." He looked at my mother and gave an order. "Susan wants Jessica to have the guest bedroom painted before the holidays. Send Tom over this weekend to handle it." My mother did not hesitate. "Of course," she said, and she looked at me. "Ava, go put your cousin's laundry in the dryer." That was the exact moment I realized my mother did not belong to herself. Her soul was leased. Uncle Richard paid the mortgage. He funded my mother's country club membership so she could sit on the patio with the other Mountain Brook wives and pretend she was one of them. The club had a strict dress code and a waiting list that spanned a decade. My mother guarded her membership card like a religious artifact. It was her only shield against the reality of her empty checking account. Because Uncle Richard paid the bills, Aunt Susan dictated our reality. Her word was law. If Susan wanted to host Thanksgiving, we drove to Atlanta. If Susan decided a certain shade of blue was tacky, my mother threw away her favorite dresses. I refused to play the game. When I grew up, I moved into a cramped third-floor apartment on the edge of town. I worked as a freelance copywriter, grinding out product descriptions and ad copy to pay my own rent. My car was 10 years old. The heater rattled, but the title was in my name. I was free. And then I met Liam. Liam was not loud. He did not wear golf shirts or boast about profit margins. He spent his days bent over a scarred wooden workbench in the corner of our small living room. The air around him always smelled faintly of brass polish and mineral spirits. He wore a jeweler's loop over his right eye. Liam restored vintage luxury watches. He worked with rare pieces that had been neglected or tossed aside in estate sales. He took things that looked broken, scrubbed away the grime, recalibrated the gears, and coaxed them back to life. I loved watching him work. He possessed a level of patience I had never seen in my own bloodline. He would sit for hours with tweezers the size of a needle realigning a microscopic spring. He understood that true quality takes time. He revealed their true hidden value. My family despised him. They looked at his calloused hands and his flannel shirts and saw a peasant. At Sunday dinners, Aunt Susan would ask Liam if he was still playing with his little clocks. Uncle Richard called him a tinkerer. My mother would sigh and ask when he planned to get a real corporate career. They viewed my life with Liam as a quaint, low-budget tragedy. They could not comprehend his work because they only understood surface-level shine. In the watch world, there is a term for what my family was. They were a counterfeit Rolex. If you hold a fake watch, it feels heavy. It catches the light. It looks expensive to an untrained eye. But if you open the casing, you find cheap plastic gears. The movement is erratic. It is destined to grind itself to dust. Liam worked with authentic gears. My family ran on counterfeit pride. This fundamental difference is why my wedding was so easily discarded. I had mailed my save the dates in October. The garden venue was booked. The deposit was paid. 8 months later, Aunt Susan woke up on a Sunday and decided Jessica needed a spectacular milestone event. Jessica was turning 30. Susan declared it would be a 3-day Great Gatsby extravaganza at a boutique hotel in Atlanta. She booked the ballroom. She ordered custom ice sculptures. The dates matched my wedding weekend perfectly. It was not an accident. It was a flex. Susan knew my dates. She chose that specific weekend to remind my mother who held the leash. The message was clear. You can attend your daughter's cheap garden wedding, or you can attend my daughter's gala and keep your house. My parents did not even hold a family meeting to discuss it. There was no debate. They sacrificed my wedding date on the altar of Aunt Susan's bank account without a second thought. They chose the illusion of wealth over their own child. They justified it by telling themselves my wedding was not a real event anyway. It was just a gathering for a tinkerer and a copywriter. I tried to pretend it would be fine. I told Liam we did not need the whole extended family. We just needed my parents. I printed the formal invitations. I addressed the envelopes by hand. I used a wax seal on the back of each one. I walked to the post office and dropped them in the mail slot. I told myself my mother would find a way to be there. She had to. I was her firstborn. But logic does not apply to people who are addicted to pretending they are rich. The days ticked by. The mail carrier came and went. The small wooden box I bought to hold the returned response card sat empty on my kitchen counter. I checked the mailbox every afternoon. I waited for the thick cream-colored envelopes to arrive. I waited for a sign that I mattered. Instead, I got a lesson in exactly how disposable I was. The envelopes finally started showing up in my mailbox. I carried the first stack upstairs and sat on my cheap sofa. My hands began to shake. I slid my finger under the flap of the first envelope. I pulled out the heavy cardstock. The gold foil lettering caught the light from the window. I stared at the dark ink. I knew right then the storm was not just coming. It was already inside my house. I tore open the first cream envelope. The heavy cardstock slid into my palm. I looked at the line where guests were supposed to write their names. Uncle Richard and Aunt Susan, and Aunt Oy. Below their names were 2 small, elegant boxes, one for accept, one for decline. A sharp black checkmark sat dead center in the decline box. I set it on the coffee table. I opened the next one. My cousin David decline. Aunt Martha decline. I methodically sliced through 18 envelopes. 18 sharp ink marks rejecting my existence. The final envelope bore my parents' return address. I stared at my mother's looping cursive script. She had used a custom return label she bought for her holiday cards. I slid my thumb under the paper seal. The card fell onto my lap. Decline. The box was checked with a thick blue marker. It was not a mistake. It was a declaration. I did not cry. Crying requires a sense of shock. I was realizing that deep down I had expected this betrayal. I picked up my phone. My hands were trembling, but my breathing was shallow and even. I dialed the landline to the Mountain Brook house. It rang 3 times before my mother picked up. Her voice was bright and airy. She sounded like she was practicing her country club greeting. "Hello, Diane speaking." I gripped the plastic edge of my phone case. "Mom, it's Ava." The bright tone evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a tight, cautious hum. "Oh, hi, sweetie. I am a bit busy right now. The caterer for Jessica's party is supposed to send over the updated menu." I looked at the stack of 18 rejection cards covering my coffee table. "Mom, nobody is coming. You sent your card back marked decline. You are really not coming to my wedding. Ah." The pause on the line lasted perhaps 4 seconds. It felt like a decade. That silence was the foundational architecture of my entire childhood. It was the empty space where a mother's fierce protective instinct should have lived. Ava, be reasonable, she sighed. Her tone shifted from cautious to deeply irritated. Susan planned this big milestone months ago. You threw this little wedding together at the last minute. We cannot offend your Aunt Susan by skipping the birthday. She has already paid for our hotel rooms. It was a verifiable brazen lie. I sat up straight. The trembling in my hands stopped. Mom, I mailed my save the dates 8 months ago in October. I hand-delivered yours to the kitchen island. Jessica decided she wanted a Gatsby party 8 weeks ago. She stole the date. I stated the facts calmly. I did not raise my voice. The truth does not need to shout. My mother hated facts. Facts ruined the pristine narrative she curated for her friends. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She was cornered by reality. When a person obsessed with image is cornered, they do not apologize. They attack. Well, she snapped. Her voice was no longer airy. It was venomous. Maybe if Liam had a real career, you could afford a venue people actually wanted to travel to. It's just a rented garden, Ava. You cannot expect the entire family to clear their schedules for a makeshift ceremony. If you had married someone with actual prospects, maybe we would have something to celebrate. She did not just choose her niece's birthday over my vows. She chose to degrade the man I loved to justify her own moral bankruptcy. She weaponized Liam's modest workshop against his character. She equated his quiet, honest labor with worthlessness. She needed my life to look pathetic so her choice to abandon me would look justified to her peers. I listened to the static on the line. I pictured her standing in her spotless kitchen, clinging to a lifestyle funded by another man's checkbook. She was terrified of Aunt Susan. She was terrified of losing her country club status. She was willing to burn her firstborn child to keep her hands warm. I did not scream. I did not call her names. I did not beg her to love me. I simply removed the phone from my ear and tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence in my apartment returned. It was heavy, but it was clean. I stood up from the sofa. I walked to the coffee table and gathered the 18 gold foil cards. I stacked them into a neat uniform pile. The edges lined up perfectly. I walked into the bedroom. On my nightstand sat a small wooden box. Liam had carved it for me for our 1-year anniversary. It was made from reclaimed walnut wood. He had spent weeks sanding the edges until they felt like silk under my fingertips. He lined the inside with dark green velvet. He built things to last. My family built things to look good until the paint peeled. I opened the brass latch on the wooden box. The hinges moved without a single squeak. I placed the stack of decline cards inside the velvet interior. I ran my index finger over the top card. The thick blue check mark my mother had drawn stared back at me. I was not keeping these cards to torture myself. I was saving them as a physical record. Memory fades. Time smooths over the sharp edges of betrayal. People who hurt you will eventually try to convince you the knife was never in their hand. I needed these pieces of paper. They were undeniable proof of who my family truly was. They were a loaded weapon waiting in the dark. I closed the lid. I engaged the brass latch. It clicked into place. I slid the box into the back of my deep desk drawer, pushing it into the shadows. Liam walked into the bedroom a few minutes later. He had a smudge of machine oil on his cheek. He looked at my face and then glanced at the empty coffee table in the living room visible through the open doorway. He knew what the mail carrier had brought. He did not ask if my parents were coming. He walked over, wrapped his arms around my waist, and pulled me against his chest. He smelled like cedar and hard work. "We do not need a crowd, Ava," he whispered into my hair. "We just need each other." I closed my eyes and leaned into his solid frame. He was right. We did not need them. But the rejection was only the first phase of their cruelty. Deciding not to attend was a passive act. What they did on the actual day of my wedding was active psychological warfare. The calendar pages turned. June 12th arrived. The morning sky over Alabama was a clear, piercing blue. I woke up feeling a strange mix of profound peace and sharp, lingering grief. I walked into the bathroom to start pinning up my hair for the ceremony. I reached for my phone to play some music. I tapped the screen. It lit up with a barrage of notifications. They were not texts wishing me a beautiful wedding day. They were Instagram tags, dozens of them. The digital storm was brewing, and my mother was the one orchestrating the lightning. June 12th broke with a humid, heavy warmth typical of an Alabama summer. I stood in the narrow bathroom of our third-floor apartment, staring at my reflection in the mirrored medicine cabinet. Behind me, hanging from a plastic hook on the door, was my dress. I bought it at a vintage consignment shop in a local strip mall. It lacked French lace or hand-sewn pearls. It was simple ivory chiffon. I loved it because I paid for it myself without asking anyone for permission. I turned the brass knob on the sink and let the cold water run splashing it over my face to wake up my tired eyes. I reached for a cotton towel. That is when the buzzing started. My phone sat on the edge of the porcelain sink. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow against the bathroom tiles. A notification banner slid across the glass, then another, and a third. Within 10 seconds, the device was vibrating a steady rhythm against the ceramic surface. My heart did a brief, foolish flutter. For a fraction of a second, the naive child inside me thought my family had woken up feeling guilty. I thought perhaps my father had driven down early to surprise me. I picked up the phone. The notifications were not text messages from my parents, they were Instagram alerts. I unlocked the screen and opened the app. The digital feed loaded. My mother had tagged me in a post. She did not tag me to wish me a beautiful wedding day. She tagged me so I would not miss her spectacle. The first image was a high-definition video of a ballroom in Atlanta. A jazz band played in the corner. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne flutes. In the center of the room stood a towering ice sculpture carved into the shape of a giant letter J. My cousin Jessica stood next to it wearing a silver sequin dress that caught the strobe lights overhead. The caption beneath the video read, "Kicking off the best weekend ever for our favorite girl." There was a custom hashtag at the bottom of the text. I tapped it. A grid of dozens of photos materialized. My family had turned my wedding day into a synchronized broadcasting event. I clicked on a photo uploaded by Aunt Susan. It showed my parents. My father, Tom, held a thick imported cigar in one hand and a tumbler of amber liquid in the other. He stood on a wrought iron balcony beside Uncle Richard, laughing at some unheard joke. My mother stood next to them holding a glass of wine. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo. She wore a beaded gown that cost more than my entire wedding budget. Her smile was wide, bright, and performative. I scrolled through the images, leaning my weight against the bathroom counter. The cold porcelain seeped through my thin cotton robe. I watched my bloodline perform cinematic joy for an audience of digital strangers. They were 150 miles away, ignoring the fact that their eldest daughter was about to exchange sacred vows. This was not merely an absence. It was a calculated display. It was a demonstration of power and priorities. They wanted me to see the opulence. They wanted me to feel the hollow ache in my chest. They were broadcasting their happiness to ensure I knew the exact caliber of the event I was missing. It was psychological warfare designed to shrink me into submission. I could not look away from the screen. My thumb hovered over a picture of Jessica blowing out candles on a tiered fondant cake. The bathroom door creaked open. Liam stepped inside. He had just showered. His dark hair was damp and he wore a simple white undershirt and dark trousers. He stopped when he saw my face. He did not ask what was wrong. He looked at the glowing screen in my hand. He saw the ice sculpture, the champagne, the custom hashtags. He understood the cruelty of the timing instantly. Liam took one step forward. He reached out and gently slid the phone from my trembling fingers. He did not say a word about my mother or Aunt Susan. He simply turned the device face down on the bathroom counter, silencing the visual assault. He took both of my hands in his. His palms were rough from years of working with metal files and jeweler's tools, but his touch was incredibly grounding. He rubbed his thumb across my knuckles, anchoring me back to the present moment. The quiet sanctuary of our small apartment slowly replaced the loud, flashy illusion of the Atlanta ballroom. As we stood there, the silence was broken by a different sound. Liam's phone resting in his front pocket emitted a short, distinct chime. It was a private text alert he reserved for high-priority clients. He kept one hand holding mine and used the other to retrieve his phone. He glanced at the screen. A subtle shift occurred in his posture. The tension in his shoulders dissolved. A slow, quiet smile touched the corners of his mouth. He tilted the screen toward me so I could read the incoming message. The area code on the sender ID was from Geneva, Switzerland. The text was short and professional. It read, "Mr. Bennett, the authentication is verified. The funds for the restored 1950s Patek Philippe chronograph have been wired to your holding account." The numbers listed below the text made my breath catch in my throat. It was a six-figure sum more money than my father earned in 2 years of processing insurance claims. Liam had spent the last 4 months painstakingly restoring the rare timepiece in the corner of our living room. He had sourced original microscopic gears from collectors in Europe and breathed life back into a dead artifact. I looked from Liam's phone to my phone lying face down on the counter. The contrast was a physical shock. My family was 2 hours north drinking away Uncle Richard's money. They were celebrating a counterfeit lifestyle funded by predatory car loans and hidden debt. They were wearing rented sequins and standing next to melting ice sculptures. Meanwhile, the man they called a worthless tinkerer was quietly securing the foundation of a legitimate empire. Liam was not pretending to be wealthy for an audience. He was building real generational power in the shadows through unmatched skill and infinite patience. Liam kissed my forehead and stepped out of the bathroom to finish getting dressed. I stood alone by the sink. I picked up my phone and turned it face up. The screen glowed with the image of my mother smiling on the hotel balcony. The pain in my chest was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, crystal-clear resolve. I pressed the buttons on the side of my phone and took a screenshot. I swiped to the next photo of my father with his cigar. I took another screenshot. I went through the entire custom hashtag, capturing every single post, every boastful caption, every performative comment. I opened the photo gallery on my device and created a new hidden album. I named the folder Receipts. I moved all 42 screenshots into the dark digital vault. I was not saving them out of spite. I was saving them because I knew human nature. I knew that one day the champagne would run dry. I knew that one day the illusion would shatter and my family would try to rewrite history. They would try to claim they had always supported me. I needed a permanent, unalterable record of their choices so I would never be tempted to believe their future lies. I locked the phone and reached for the ivory chiffon dress hanging on the door. It was time to go to the botanical garden. It was time to face the empty chairs and hear the promise Liam was about to make. The Birmingham Botanical Garden was bathed in the heavy golden light of a late southern afternoon. Spanish moss hung from the ancient oak trees bordering the perimeter, casting long, uneven shadows across the manicured grass. We had rented a small secluded grove centered around a magnificent weeping willow. Its sweeping green vines created a natural canopy that swayed whenever a warm breeze pushed through the humid air. It was a beautiful place to make a promise. Beneath the sweeping branches sat the physical manifestation of my discarded worth. The venue coordinator had arranged the seating exactly to my original specifications. 74 white wooden folding chairs stood in perfectly aligned, uniform rows. The paint on them was pristine. The alignment was flawless. They formed a silent phantom audience. In the very front row offset to the right sat 6 occupied seats, 6 people. My college roommate, a neighbor who often shared coffee with us, 2 local friends from my freelance copywriting network, a mentor and a quiet watch collector who had become Liam's closest confidant. 6 beating hearts surrounded by an ocean of empty white wood. I stood at the edge of the paved walkway preparing to take my first step onto the grass. The string duo I hired began to play a soft cello arrangement. My hands were slick with nervous sweat. I reached up to adjust the faux pearl necklace resting against my collarbone. I had bought the strand from a clearance rack earlier that week, hoping the ivory beads would make my thrifted chiffon dress look slightly more intentional. As my fingers brushed the back of my neck, the brittle metal clasp snapped. The tiny broken piece of alloy fell into the grass. The pearls slipped, threatening to cascade onto the dirt. I froze. A sudden suffocating wave of humiliation washed over me. I was about to walk down an empty aisle without my father, without my mother, and now my cheap jewelry was falling apart. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the sting of unshed tears. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. Liam did not wait at the altar. He did not care about tradition or superstition. He saw my shoulders tense from 40 feet away, and he abandoned his post. He walked straight up the aisle past the empty chairs and stopped right in front of me. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His presence instantly grounded the chaotic spinning in my head. "Turn around," he whispered. His voice was a low, steady rumble. I obeyed. I felt the warm weight of his calloused fingers graze my skin. These were the same hands that manipulated microscopic gears, that recalibrated fragile mainsprings worth more than the land we were standing on. He gathered the loose ends of the broken necklace. With infinite patience, he threaded the remaining wire through the intact loop, twisting it securely so the pearls rested perfectly in place. Once more, he did not rush. He treated my clearance rack jewelry with the exact same reverence he applied to a priceless artifact. He stepped around to face me again, his eyes locked onto mine. "You are ready," he said. We walked down the remaining stretch of the aisle together. I did not hold a father's arm. I held the hand of the man who chose me. We reached the officiant standing beneath the weeping willow. The air felt thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke about partnership and resilience, but the words felt like background noise. My focus was entirely consumed by the gravity of the moment and the stark reality surrounding us. When it was time for the vows, Liam reached into his jacket pocket. I expected him to pull out a folded piece of paper. Instead, his hand emerged empty. He had not written anything down. He stepped closer, eliminating the remaining space between us. He took both of my hands in his. He turned his head slowly, surveying the expanse of unoccupied white wooden seats. He looked at the chair where my mother should have been sitting. He looked at the row designated for Aunt Susan and Uncle Richard. Then his gaze returned to me. His eyes were dark, piercing, and devoid of any doubt. "They look at this and see a lack of wealth," Liam said. He kept his voice intimate, but the acoustics of the grove carried every syllable clearly in the quiet Alabama air. "They look at us and see a life they consider beneath them. I look at you and see the only treasure that matters. I promise you, Ava, the world will eventually see what I see. And when they do, they will not be allowed at our table." It was a devastating, beautiful declaration. The words settled over me like a heavy protective mantle. It was not merely a romantic sentiment. It was an ironclad vow of future sovereignty. I thought about the text message from Switzerland earlier that morning. I thought about the 6-figure wire transfer. What my family did not know, what they were too obsessed with their counterfeit country club status to ever investigate, was the true scope of my husband's work. Liam did not just clean old clock faces. He was an invisible kingmaker in the horological world. He brokered multi-million-dollar timepieces to international billionaires' royalty and anonymous tycoons. He operated a shadow empire from a battered workbench in our cramped apartment. He was quietly accumulating a titan's fortune while my relatives celebrated their leased vehicles and predatory loans. Standing under the weeping willow, listening to the quiet conviction in his voice, my internal landscape shifted permanently. The desperate childhood ache for my parents' approval dissolved into the warm, humid breeze. I did not need my mother to validate my existence. I did not need Uncle Richard to legitimize my marriage. We did not need them to fill those empty seats. We were stepping into a future they could not even conceptualize. We were leaving them entirely in our rearview mirror. We exchanged rings. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. The 6 friends in the front row stood up and cheered. Their applause felt richer and more authentic than any standing ovation in an Atlanta ballroom. We spent the evening eating catered barbecue under string lights, drinking wine, and laughing until our ribs ached. It was a perfect, joyous night. But as the stars appeared over Birmingham, I knew the peace was temporary. The Gatsby party in Atlanta was winding down too. The weekend was ending. Reality was waiting. My family had ignored my wedding day, but they were incapable of ignoring me forever. They required my submission to fuel their superiority. I knew that within a few days the silence would break. They would attempt to sweep their absence under the rug. They would expect me to simply fall back into line. The digital storm was coming, and it would require a boundary I had never dared to draw before. The post-wedding glow lasted exactly 72 hours. Wednesday morning arrived with a quiet, gentle rain tapping against the single-bedroom window of our third-floor apartment. Liam was already awake. The scent of freshly ground dark roast coffee drifted down the narrow hallway, mixing with the familiar metallic tang of the watch solvent he used at his workbench. I lay in bed wrapped in a thick cotton quilt, staring at the ceiling. I felt rested. I felt safe. I felt like a woman who had survived a shipwreck and finally washed ashore on a private deserted island. Then the device on my nightstand vibrated. It was a harsh mechanical buzz that shattered the morning calm. The screen illuminated, casting a piercing blue light across the dark wood of the side table. I rolled over and squinted at the display. A notification banner hovered near the top edge of the glass. It was from the Smith family group chat. The shared thread had been dormant for 3 entire days. My relatives had spent the weekend uploading hundreds of photos to their public social media profiles, but they had maintained absolute radio silence in our private messaging space. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were waiting for the dust to settle. They were giving it just enough time so they could pretend my wedding was an afterthought, rather than a deliberate casualty of their social climbing. I reached out and picked up the device. The glass felt cold against my palm. I unlocked the screen and opened the application. The first text was from Aunt Susan. It popped into the thread at 8:14 in the morning. "Hope the little ceremony went well." The sentence ended with a digital illustration of a martini glass, a cocktail emoji. I stared at the tiny pixelated olive resting in the cartoon cup. The sheer casualness of the icon felt like a physical slap across the face. Susan had orchestrated a $50,000 birthday gala that siphoned my parents away from my altar. She had forced my mother to choose between a daughter and a country club membership, and her only acknowledgement of that devastation was a brightly colored digital beverage. She was signaling that my marriage held the exact same emotional weight as a happy hour she forgot to attend. 2 minutes later, a second text bubble appeared. This one belonged to my mother. Diane always followed Susan's lead. If Susan set the tone as breezy and dismissive, my mother was obligated to match the energy. "Such a crazy weekend recovering from Atlanta," my mother typed. "We are all exhausted. Send some pictures of your garden setup when you get a chance, Ava. We would love to see what you guys managed to put together." The manipulation embedded in those 3 sentences was breathtaking. My mother did not offer a single word of apology. There was no regret. There was no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Instead, she centered her own fatigue. She complained about being drained from partying while entirely ignoring the fact that she had abandoned her firstborn child. Furthermore, she used the phrase "managed to put together." She was intentionally framing my sacred vows as a makeshift arts and crafts project. She needed to diminish my wedding to justify her absence. If my ceremony was just a cheap little garden setup, then missing it was not a maternal failure. It was simply a matter of prioritizing a better event. A third message chimed. It was my father. Tom was a man who spent his entire life avoiding confrontation by hiding behind his wife's skirts and his brother-in-law's wallet. He never stood up to Diane, and he never challenged Richard. His strategy for maintaining peace was to offer pathetic, cheap olive branches after the damage was already done. "We will take you and Liam out to the Olive Garden on Highway 280 to celebrate next week." His message read, "Our treat. Let us know what evening works for your schedule." I sat up in bed and let the quilt fall away from my shoulders. The brazen nature of my father's offer crystallized the entire toxic dynamic of my bloodline. My uncle had just spent tens of thousands of dollars renting a ballroom, hiring jazz bands, and commissioning ice sculptures for my cousin Jessica. My parents had happily participated in that opulent display of counterfeit wealth. Now my father was offering to buy me a plate of endless breadsticks at a chain restaurant in a strip mall to compensate for missing the most important day of my life. He genuinely believed a $20 pasta dish would balance the cosmic scale. I looked at the 3 text bubbles glowing on the screen, the martini glass. The complaint about being exhausted, the chain restaurant invitation. They expected me to swallow the disrespect. They expected me to type back a polite, agreeable response. They wanted me to say I understood their fatigue and that dinner sounded lovely. That was the unspoken rule of the Smith household. I was required to absorb their cruelty without complaint. If I got angry, they would label me dramatic. If I cried, they would call me oversensitive. The only acceptable reaction was complete compliance. The tension inside me reached a sudden boiling point. I realized in that exact moment that my silence was no longer sufficient. Enduring their neglect was not enough for them. They demanded my active complicity in my own erasure. They needed me to play the role of the grateful, invisible daughter so they could sleep peacefully at night without facing the monstrous nature of their choices. I swung my legs over the side of the mattress. My bare feet hit the cold hardwood floor. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of Liam's coffee and the metallic tang of his honest work. I was a married woman now. I belonged to a man who looked at an empty lawn and promised me an empire. I did not belong to Diane and Tom anymore. I did not have to play their twisted game. I tapped the empty text field at the bottom of the screen. The digital keyboard appeared. My thumbs hovered over the letters. I did not draft a long, emotional paragraph. I did not list my grievances or beg for an explanation. Explanations are for people who care about your feelings. My relatives only cared about their optics. I typed 3 short sentences. My wedding was beautiful. The empty chairs told me exactly where I stand. Please do not contact me. I read the words twice to ensure there were no typos. The tone was cold, precise, and devoid of any lingering desperation. It was a statement of fact. I pressed the blue arrow icon. The message shot into the group chat, landing directly beneath my father's pasta invitation. I did not wait to see the read receipts appear. I did not wait for the inevitable defensive explosions that would surely follow. I knew my mother would immediately start typing a furious response, accusing me of ruining her morning. I knew Aunt Susan would call my father to complain about my lack of respect. I did not care. Their reactions were no longer my burden to carry. I tapped the icon in the top right corner of the screen to open the group settings. I scrolled down to the bottom of the menu. I pressed the red text that read, "Leave conversation." A prompt appeared asking if I was sure. I confirmed the action. The chat vanished from my application, but I was not finished. I opened my contacts list. I navigated to my mother's profile. I scrolled to the bottom and pressed "Block this caller." I repeated the process for my father. I found Aunt Susan's number and blocked it. I blocked Uncle Richard. I blocked my cousin Jessica. I went through my entire digital address book and systematically severed every single line of communication tying me to the Smith bloodline. I erased their phone numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I restricted their profiles on every social networking platform I possessed. I built a massive, impenetrable digital wall around my life. I did not just close the door on them. I engaged the deadbolt from the inside and threw the key into the ocean. I set the device face down on the nightstand. The apartment was completely silent, save for the gentle rhythm of the rain hitting the window glass. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for 28 years was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, terrifying, exhilarating freedom. Liam appeared in the bedroom doorway holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs. He looked at my face. He looked at the device resting quietly on the table. He did not ask what had happened. He walked over, handed me a mug of black coffee, and sat beside me on the edge of the mattress. He wrapped one arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. We sat there in the quiet gray morning, drinking our coffee. I had amputated my entire family, and I felt nothing but profound relief. The cord was cut. The toxic anchor was gone. Now there was nothing holding us back. There was nothing left to do but build. And over the next 5 years, the empire Liam and I would construct in total silent isolation would become a force of nature my family could never possibly anticipate. The ticking clock of our ascent had officially started, and their countdown to total financial ruin had just begun. 5 years dissolved into the rearview mirror. We did not spend those 60 months seeking external validation or plotting petty acts of retribution. We spent that era building a fortress. My freelance copywriting gig morphed into a dedicated elite agency. I pitched tech startups in Silicon Valley from my home office and landed exclusive retainer contracts that dwarfed my previous annual income. Liam outpaced my success exponentially. His meticulous authentication skills caught the attention of a premier Swiss auction house. They bypassed their usual corporate channels and offered him a lucrative partnership. He was no longer just restoring watches at a cramped workbench. He was certifying the most coveted historical timepieces on the globe before they hit the international auction block. The physical environment around us shifted to match our new tax bracket. The third-floor walk-up apartment became a distant memory. We purchased a sprawling modern glass estate on 30 acres of private wooded land just outside the city limits. The architecture featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a state-of-the-art temperature-controlled workshop for Liam, and a winding driveway hidden behind heavy iron gates. We hired landscape architects to curate the grounds and interior designers to fill the rooms with bespoke furniture. Yet, nobody in my bloodline knew a single detail about this transformation. I maintained a strict digital blackout. My social media profiles remained deactivated. We moved like phantoms through the upper echelons of society. True power thrives in the shadows. The collision of our two realities happened on a brisk Tuesday afternoon in November. Liam's 32nd birthday was approaching. I wanted to procure something exceptional to commemorate his latest corporate acquisition. I drove 2 hours east across the state line to Buckhead. It is the premier luxury shopping district in Atlanta, where the streets are lined with imported vehicles and flagship designer storefronts. I walked into a renowned horology boutique. The air inside smelled of rich mahogany and polished leather. The lighting was deliberately dim, focusing entirely on the illuminated glass display cases housing mechanical works of art. I knew exactly what I needed. I selected a handcrafted Italian leather watch winder capable of holding 12 automatic timepieces. The interior was lined with crushed velvet, and the hardware was solid brass. The price tag read $10,000. 5 years ago, that number would have induced a panic attack. Today, I simply handed the sales associate my sleek metal credit card. He bowed his head slightly and carried the item to the wrapping counter near the back of the showroom. I followed him, my heels clicking softly against the pristine marble floor. As I approached the register, the hushed, sophisticated atmosphere of the boutique was pierced by a sharp, familiar tone. It was a voice that had narrated every holiday dinner of my childhood. I froze. Just a few feet to my right, standing at the consignment appraisal desk, was my cousin Jessica. I stood partially hidden behind a display pillar and observed her. Jessica used to float through rooms wrapped in an aura of untouchable arrogance. She was the girl who demanded a Great Gatsby gala while my wedding chair sat empty. The woman standing at the desk today looked frayed. The roots of her blonde hair were showing. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors, a transparent attempt to hide her identity from the wealthy patrons. Placed on the pristine glass counter in front of her was a designer handbag. I recognized the shape and the logo. It was the exact bag she had flaunted at Thanksgiving 4 years ago. The bottom corners were visibly scuffed and the gold hardware had dulled from neglect. The appraiser, a man in a sharp navy suit, pushed the bag back toward her with a polite but firm gesture. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, keeping his voice measured. "The wear on the base and the missing authenticity card bring the valuation below our minimum threshold. We cannot offer you a cash advance for this item today." Jessica gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles turned stark white. "You have to take it," she hissed. Her voice cracked, laced with a frantic edge I had never heard her use before. "Do you know who my father is? I bought this very item here. I need the cash transfer today. Please run it again." The appraiser remained stoic. "My apologies again, ma'am. Our policy is strict." Jessica snatched the scuffed bag off the counter. She spun around on her heel, preparing to storm toward the exit. That sudden pivot brought her directly into my line of sight. We locked eyes. The air in the boutique stopped moving. The ambient jazz music playing from the hidden speakers seemed to fade into nothingness. I watched her gaze travel over my frame, taking inventory of every detail. She looked at my tailored wool coat draped elegantly over my shoulders. She looked at the expensive silk blouse and the pristine designer boots encasing my feet. Then her eyes dropped to my left hand resting on my purse. For our 2nd anniversary, Liam had upgraded my wedding band, replacing the modest original stone with a flawless 3-carat emerald-cut diamond. It caught the recessed lighting and flashed brilliantly in the dim room. Finally. She looked at the sales associate returning to my side, carrying an enormous matte black shopping bag embossed with the boutique's gold crest. The associate handed me a sleek leather receipt holder. "Please sign at the bottom line, Mrs. Bennett," he murmured, holding out a heavy fountain pen. I took the pen. I did not break eye contact with Jessica. Her mouth hung slightly open. The color had drained entirely from her face, leaving her pale and hollow. She looked like a ghost who had just realized she was dead. She was standing in a high-end store begging a stranger for pocket change, while the cousin she threw away was dropping 5 figures on a random weekday without blinking. We did not exchange a single syllable. There was no need for words. The stark, undeniable reality of our inverted positions spoke volumes. I signed the paper with a fluid motion. I handed the pen back to the associate and took my purchase. I turned to Jessica, offered a single brief, polite nod, and walked past her. The heavy glass doors slid open, granting me passage to the bustling Atlanta street. I climbed into the driver's seat of my imported sedan and placed the large shopping bag on the passenger side. I pressed the push-to-start button. The engine roared to life. I merged onto the highway heading west back toward Alabama. As the city skyline faded in the rearview mirror, my mind raced. The visual shift in power was staggering, but underneath the deep satisfaction, a darker question emerged. Jessica was Aunt Susan's daughter. She was the heir to the Smith family fortune. She was supposed to be insulated by Uncle Richard's limitless bank accounts. A woman with an endless trust fund does not try to pawn a damaged purse for quick cash on a Tuesday. She does not leverage her father's name unless that name is suddenly failing to open doors. Something fundamental was fracturing within their pristine facade. The financial leash that had choked my parents for decades was fraying at the edges. I did not know the specific details yet, but the scent of smoke was undeniable. A fire was burning through Uncle Richard's empire, and the flames were about to consume them all. The encounter in the luxury boutique was merely the faint scent of smoke. The actual fire had been raging behind closed doors for months. Uncle Richard's dealership empire was widely regarded as an untouchable Southern institution. He sponsored local charity golf tournaments and plastered his smiling face on highway billboards. Beneath the polished showroom floors, however, the foundation was rotting. His wealth was a mirage sustained by predatory lending practices, ghost inventory, and fraudulent loan applications. The math was destined to fail. The public execution of his legacy occurred on a bright, crisp Thursday morning. Customers arriving at the flagship Atlanta lot for routine oil changes were greeted by a jarring sight. Men and women wearing dark windbreakers with federal acronyms printed across their backs swarmed the property. They walked out of the glass double doors carrying heavy white cardboard boxes. Those boxes were filled with hard drives, financial ledgers, and decades of fabricated tax returns. Yellow crime scene tape was stretched across the pristine service bay entrances. The empire crumbled before the morning news broadcast concluded. Regional newspapers attributed the raid to a routine audit gone wrong. They speculated about disgruntled former accountants acting as whistleblowers. The public narrative was simple greed catching up to a local titan. The truth was an exquisite piece of profound dramatic irony that my relatives never discovered. Richard's downfall was not initiated by a brilliant federal investigator. It was triggered by his own desperate hubris and the diligent hands of the man he once dismissed as a worthless tinkerer. 6 months prior to the federal raid, Uncle Richard was secretly suffocating. He had leveraged his dealerships to the breaking point to cover mounting hidden debts. He needed a rapid injection of untraceable liquid capital to satisfy a margin call. During a panicked trip to Europe, he acquired a vintage timepiece. It was a rare, historically significant Patek Philippe complication. He planned to sell it quietly on the gray market to a private domestic collector and use the funds to plug the holes in his sinking ship. Richard found a willing buyer. The buyer. acting with the standard caution of elite collectors, insisted the artifact undergo rigorous authentication before wiring the funds. The collector sent the timepiece to a premier Swiss-affiliated firm. That firm was run by Liam. I remember the evening the package arrived at our estate. Liam sat at his pristine, temperature-controlled workbench. He adjusted the jeweler's loop over his right eye and carefully opened the casing of the vintage watch. He studied the microscopic gears, the patina on the dial, and the intricate engravings on the movement. He then cross-referenced the serial number against an encrypted international registry of high-value assets. A red flag illuminated his computer monitor. The timepiece had been reported stolen from a private estate in Geneva nearly a decade prior. Liam did not gloat. He did not realize immediately that the seller was my uncle because the transaction was brokered through a network of shell companies. Even if he had known, Liam would not have deviated from his principles. He simply followed standard corporate compliance. He picked up his phone and notified the international authorities that a stolen artifact worth millions had crossed his desk. He provided the tracking information and the details of the shell company attempting the sale. That single hushed phone call unspooled the entire thread of Richard's criminal enterprise. Federal authorities looked into the shell company trying to fence the stolen watch. That investigation gave them the legal leverage to pry open Richard's personal bank accounts. Once they saw the chaotic transfer of funds inside his private ledgers, they secured warrants to examine the dealership networks. Liam pulled one loose string, and the entire counterfeit tapestry unraveled. The legal hammer fell with swift, devastating precision. Courts froze every asset bearing Uncle Richard's name. The bank accounts were locked. The sprawling inventory of luxury vehicles was seized by the government. Aunt Susan went from hosting exclusive country club luncheons to dodging investigative reporters camped on her manicured front lawn. Her credit cards were declined at grocery stores. The untouchable matriarch was suddenly stripped of her only source of power. The Smith family economy operated on a single fragile tether. When Richard plummeted into the abyss, he dragged my parents down with him. For decades, my mother and father relied on Richard's monthly checks to sustain their Mountain Brook illusion. When the assets were frozen, those checks vanished overnight. My parents possessed zero savings. They had spent every dime trying to keep up appearances. The consequences were brutal and immediate. Without Richard's subsidy, my parents defaulted on their mortgage. The bank issued a formal foreclosure notice within 90 days. I drove past my childhood home once during that period. A neon green eviction document was taped to the heavy oak front door. The manicured hedges my mother prized were already overgrown and dying. The brick colonial where I was taught to shrink myself was repossessed and sold at a public auction. Jessica suffered an equally harsh reality check. She lost the luxury high-rise condo her father had subsidized. Her pristine white SUV was repossessed directly from a valet parking lot while she was eating lunch at an upscale bistro. She possessed no college degree, no viable job history, and suddenly no trust fund to catch her fall. She was forced to pack her remaining designer clothes into cheap plastic trash bags. She moved into a cramped, short-term rental apartment in a run-down suburb alongside my disgraced parents. The very things they prioritized over my wedding had evaporated into thin air. They sacrificed their relationship with me to protect their status, their optics, and Aunt Susan's money. Now all three were gone. They were stripped of their armor and forced to live the low-budget tragedy they always assumed would be my fate. They were drowning commoners desperate for a lifeline. The isolation of poverty began to rot their pride. In their suffocating new reality, they started searching for any possible escape hatch. They needed a lifeboat. They needed someone to exploit. The silence I had enjoyed for 5 years was about to be broken by a ghost from my past wielding a very sharp, deceptive hook. The mail arrived at our estate through a secure postal drop. Liam usually sorted the daily deliveries. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, he walked into my sunlit office carrying a single plain white envelope. He placed it gently on the edge of my glass desk. There was no return address printed in the corner. The smeared postage mark indicated it originated from a rundown suburb just south of Birmingham. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the careful, slanted script of my father, Tom. My pulse quickened. For 5 years, my digital walls had held firm. I blocked their phone numbers. I restricted their social profiles. I never considered the analog route. A handwritten envelope felt archaic. It felt deeply intentional. I stared at my name penned in dark blue ink. My throat tightened, restricting my breath. I reached for a silver letter opener, slicing through the top fold of the heavy paper. Inside were 2 sheets of lined stationery. I unfolded them carefully. The words began with an apology. It was not a generic sweeping statement. It was agonizingly specific. My father wrote about his profound regrets. He described the suffocating burden of living under Richard's shadow for decades. He admitted his cowardice. He wrote about a vivid memory from my childhood when we went fishing at Oak Mountain State Park, just the 2 of us before the country club status consumed my mother. He said he missed his little girl. He stated he went to sleep every night wishing he had stood up for me on my wedding day. Reading those paragraphs stripped away the armor I had spent years forging. The cold, clinical distance I maintained fractured under the weight of his words. A deep-buried ache surfaced. My vision blurred. A single hot tear escaped, landing directly on the blue ink of his signature, causing the letters to bleed into the porous paper. For a brief, dangerous moment, the wounded 28-year-old girl inside me took the wheel. I looked at the black phone resting on my desk. I thought about dialing his number. I thought perhaps the trauma of losing everything had finally cracked open his chest and revealed a genuine father. Then I turned the page. There was a postscript scribbled hastily on the back of the second sheet. The tone shifted abruptly from poetic nostalgia to desperate logistics. P.S. Your mother and I are having some minor credit issues due to the ongoing legal situation with Richard. We found a modest apartment, but the management requires a guarantor. We just need you to co-sign the lease. It is a mere formality, Ava. We know you will do the right thing for family. The tear drying on my cheek felt like acid. The illusion shattered instantly. It was a red herring, a trap wrapped tightly in weaponized nostalgia. He did not write the letter to heal our fractured bond. He wrote it because his financial standing was decimated, and he needed a clean credit record to exploit. The fishing trip memory was nothing more than calculated bait. My father was still the exact same man who offered me a cheap pasta dinner to compensate for missing my vows. He was still avoiding reality and searching for a convenient exit strategy. I did not rip the paper into pieces. I did not throw it into the fireplace. I carefully folded the 2 sheets back into their original creases. I walked into the kitchen and dropped the envelope into the recycling bin. The brief vulnerability I experienced hardened into a permanent, indestructible barrier. They could not be trusted. They would never change. I assumed my silence would be the end of the interaction. I underestimated the sheer delusional arrogance of my mother. Diane possessed a unique ability to deny her circumstances. Despite losing her brick colonial home and her elite social standing, she refused to live in a standard rental complex. She found a luxury high-rise condominium development in downtown Birmingham. It featured concierge service, a rooftop pool, and valet parking. The monthly rent was astronomical. She knew her destroyed financial history would trigger an immediate rejection. She did not wait for my reply to the letter. Diane operated on the arrogant assumption that I would inevitably cave to their demands. She believed the familiar leash was still attached to my neck. She submitted the leasing application and confidently listed my name and social security number as the primary financial guarantor. She assumed I was still a struggling freelance copywriter who perhaps possessed a decent middle-class credit score capable of pushing the paperwork through the approval process. She was unaware she had just handed a corporate leasing agency the keys to investigate my household. The leasing agency utilized a premium financial vetting service to process applications for their high-end units. The agent handling my mother's file was a meticulous woman named Brenda. Brenda sat in her glass office and ran my credentials through the database. The system did not return a simple 3-digit score. Because Liam structured our wealth through holding companies and joint trusts, the algorithm pulled the aggregate net worth tied to my identity. The numbers populated on Brenda's screen. She blinked. She refreshed the page, assuming a software glitch had occurred. The data remained unchanged. The applicant listed as a guarantor did not possess a modest middle-class income. The inquiry revealed liquid assets, investment portfolios, and corporate holdings, placing my household net worth securely in the high 8 figures. Brenda picked up her office phone and dialed the contact number my mother provided. Diane answered on the first ring, expecting to hear she could pick up the keys to her new penthouse. "Hello, Diane speaking." She answered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Mrs. Smith, this is Brenda from the leasing office. I am calling regarding the application you submitted this morning. There seems to be a discrepancy with your guarantor information." My mother's tone grew tight. "I assure you, my daughter Ava is highly responsible. Her credit should be pristine." "It is not a matter of credit, Mrs. Smith," Brenda replied, her voice echoing with professional confusion. "Our vetting system indicates your daughter's household net worth is in the high 8 figures, her husband. Liam Bennett operates a multinational horological authentication firm. With this level of verified capital, I am simply confused why you are applying for a subsidized standard lease unit instead of purchasing the penthouse outright. Are you certain your daughter agreed to co-sign this specific tier of housing?" Brenda waited for a response. The line went dead. Diane dropped her phone onto the cheap linoleum floor of her rented duplex. The plastic screen cracked. She did not notice. The words spoken by the leasing agent echoed in her mind like a physical blow. High 8 figures, multinational firm, Liam Bennett. The secret was out. The titanium vault holding our reality was blown wide open. My mother had spent the last 5 years mourning the loss of Uncle Richard's corrupt millions. She had spent my entire adult life treating me like a disposable burden. She had laughed at my husband and called his meticulous craft a pathetic hobby. Now standing in a cramped, dilapidated kitchen, she realized the agonizing truth. She had accidentally unearthed a gold mine. The daughter she discarded was royalty. The tinkerer she mocked was a titan. The Smith family was starving in a desert, and they just discovered the person they abandoned possessed an ocean. This revelation did not fill them with remorse. It ignited a frantic, ravenous desperation. They knew where the money was located, and they were about to launch a coordinated invasion to claim it. The realization of our wealth hit the Smith family with the force of a sudden, terrifying earthquake. My mother's arrogant miscalculation at the leasing office had shattered their ignorance, but fate possessed a cruel sense of timing. Just 48 hours after Brenda from the management company dropped the bomb, a prominent luxury lifestyle publication released their highly anticipated autumn issue. The cover featured a striking black and white portrait of Liam sitting at his workbench. The headline read, "The Quiet Titan, How Liam Bennett Restored the Vintage Watch Market." The profile spanned 6 pages. It detailed his rise from a cramped apartment to operating an international authentication syndicate. It mentioned our sprawling glass estate in Alabama, and most importantly, the final paragraph revealed a closely guarded detail. It noted that the notoriously private Bennett family was preparing to host a highly exclusive 5th anniversary vow renewal at the legendary Villa del Balbianello on Lake Como, Italy. The collision of the banking leak and the magazine publication acted as a massive flare fired directly into the dark desperation of my family. They were starving and they had just discovered a banquet. I was sitting on the travertine veranda of our estate, enjoying the crisp morning air. My laptop rested on the glass table. I was reviewing final floral arrangements for Italy. I had changed my personal phone number years ago, severing the direct line, but the digital walls I built were not designed to withstand a coordinated siege fueled by raw greed. My mother possessed a terrifying ingenuity when motivated by status. She bypassed my personal boundaries by weaponizing public information. She tracked down my professional agency email address. She found the corporate contact forms for Liam's authentication firm. She mobilized the entire bloodline. I watched it happen in real time. The notification badge on my email application sitting in the dock of my screen jumped from 0 to 12, then to 27. Within 3 minutes, the red circle displayed 45 unread messages. The onslaught was biblical. I opened the application. The inbox was flooded with a toxic tide of fabricated affection. The first message was from my mother. The subject line read, "Missing my beautiful girl." "Ava darling," she wrote, "I just saw the incredible article about Liam. Your father and I are bursting with pride. We always knew he was destined for greatness. It has been far too long since we connected. Family is everything and we miss you terribly. Please call me. We need to catch up." I stared at the words, bursting with pride. She was the woman who told me Liam lacked a real career to justify skipping my vows. She was the mother who called my wedding a makeshift garden setup. Now she was attempting to claim a piece of his greatness. The next email was from Aunt Susan. She utilized Liam's public corporate inquiry form. "Liam," she typed, skipping any formal greeting. "Susan here. Thrilled to read about your corporate expansion. Richard and I are currently restructuring our own portfolio and would love to discuss some potential synergies over dinner. Also saw the news about Lake Como. Italy in the fall is divine. Let us coordinate schedules." Restructuring our portfolio was a fascinating euphemism for facing federal indictments and total bankruptcy. Susan was drowning, and she was reaching out to grab the neck of the man she used to call a tinkerer. My cousin Jessica followed suit. She managed to find my professional LinkedIn profile. She sent a direct message. "Hey, cousin," she wrote, appending a heart emoji. "Saw the Forbes piece. So crazy I am actually looking into event planning as a new career path. Would love to shadow your team in Italy and help out. Let us reconnect soon." The sheer audacity was nauseating. Over the course of 48 hours, Liam and I received 180 distinct points of contact. They called the corporate receptionist. They flooded our inboxes. They utilized every digital avenue available. Not a single message contained an apology. Not one relative mentioned the 5 years of total silence. They deliberately ignored the fact that they had sacrificed my actual wedding for a Gatsby party. They operated under the delusion that their absence could simply be paved over by the presence of our new wealth. They did not see a daughter or a niece. They saw a glowing ATM machine shaped like an Italian villa, and they demanded immediate access. They assumed that because we shared the same genetic code, the drawbridge would automatically be lowered. They believed blood was a universal currency that could purchase forgiveness without the inconvenience of accountability. The invasion escalated from digital harassment to physical intrusion. 2 days later, Liam's executive assistant, Sarah, walked into his private office carrying an enormous, extravagant floral arrangement. It was a chaotic mix of white lilies and imported orchids housed in a heavy crystal vase. "This just arrived at the front desk, Mr. Bennett," Sarah said, placing the arrangement on the conference table. Liam looked at the flowers. He did not touch them. He nodded to Sarah, indicating she should read the attached card. Sarah plucked the small white envelope from the plastic placeholder. She broke the seal and read the cursive handwriting aloud. "So incredibly proud of everything you have built. I cannot wait to celebrate family in Italy. Love, Diane and Tom." My parents were preemptively inviting themselves to an international event they had never been asked to attend. They sent flowers to a corporate office hoping to force an obligation. They believed their sheer persistence would wear down our defenses. They thought they were dealing with the fragile girl from Mountain Brook who craved their approval. They did not realize they were engaging with a fortified empire that owed them absolutely nothing. I walked into Liam's office just as Sarah finished reading the card. I looked at the imported orchids. I looked at my husband. The air in the room grew heavy. The digital walls had failed. The physical boundaries were being tested. They were pushing closer to the gate, and they were not going to stop until they forced a confrontation. The silence I had maintained for 5 years was no longer a sufficient defense mechanism. They required a definitive, devastating answer, and they were about to bring the fight directly to my front door. The floral arrangement resting on the conference table was only the beginning. My mother realized her digital campaigns and imported orchids were failing to breach my defenses. She required a physical confrontation. She needed an audience, which brings us directly back to that rainy Tuesday night. The Alabama sky had cracked open earlier that afternoon, dropping sheets of cold gray water across the entire estate. Liam and I were inside our custom kitchen. The room smelled of roasted garlic and the rich Italian wine we opened to celebrate finalizing our travel manifests. Our private flight to Milan was scheduled to depart in less than 48 hours. We were packing our luggage. We were preparing to leave the continent. Then the security system chimed. The sound was a sharp electronic pulse cutting through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I set my wine glass on the pristine marble island. Liam stopped wiping down the counters. We both looked at the digital monitor mounted flush against the wall. The screen displayed the high-definition feed from the camera positioned at the end of our winding private driveway. The heavy wrought iron gate stood tall against the relentless downpour. Standing inches from the metal bars was a solitary figure. It was my mother. Diane had driven through a severe thunderstorm, navigated the dark wooded roads, and parked her older model sedan on the muddy shoulder of the highway to ambush us. The woman on the screen was a jarring departure from the polished country club matriarch of my youth. For decades, my mother maintained a flawless exterior. She spent thousands of dollars on keratin treatments, silk blouses, and chemical peels to ensure her peers never suspected her financial reality. She always prioritized her appearance over her children. The driving rain stripped all of that carefully curated armor away. Her dyed blonde hair was plastered flat to her skull. Her posture was stooped, carrying the physical weight of bankruptcy and sudden social exile. In her trembling hands, she clutched a plastic clamshell container holding a cheap sheet cake from a local discount grocery store. The relentless rain was already seeping through the unsealed plastic seams, washing the bright pink icing into a muddy, unappetizing puddle. It was a pathetic, desperate offering meant to manipulate my emotions. Liam stepped up beside me. He did not say a single word. He simply placed a warm, steady hand on the small of my back, offering his silent, unwavering support. I reached forward and pressed the glowing blue button to activate the two-way exterior speaker. The outdoor microphone picked up the harsh sound of the rain hitting the wet asphalt.
"Ava!"
My mother cried out over the storm. Her voice cracked. It was a flawless, practiced performance of a wounded, desperate parent. "Baby, please let me in. I am so sorry about the past. We have been through sheer hell these last few years." Her face pressed closer to the cold, wet iron bars. She stared directly into the camera lens, trying to project sorrow. "Please, Ava, we need to talk about Italy. We want to be there for you this time." I stared at the pixelated image of her face on the bright monitor. She was offering an ultimate transactional apology. She was not sorry for missing my actual wedding. She was not crying because she caused me pain or because she missed her daughter. She was crying because her bank accounts were empty and she was missing a highly exclusive European vacation funded by a billionaire. Her sorrow was entirely financial. The 28-year-old girl who stood under a weeping willow wishing for her mother's validation was dead. She died the day I realized my worth did not depend on their attendance. I did not feel pity. I felt an intense, clarifying peace. I leaned toward the indoor microphone. My voice was calm, cold, and steady. "You do not want to be here for me, Mom," I said clearly through the outdoor speaker. "You just want to be near the money. The gate stays closed." I released the blue button. I tapped the screen to cut the video feed. The monitor went black, leaving her standing alone in the dark storm with her ruined cake. The silence in the kitchen returned, wrapping around us like a protective blanket. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. Liam kissed the top of my head and returned to wiping down the counters. We did not discuss the incident. We did not need to dissect her desperate attempt to breach our sanctuary. The boundary was set and it was forged in titanium. However, I knew my mother better than anyone else. A single rejection at the front gate would not extinguish her burning greed. She possessed an alarming tenacity when prestige was on the line. She was standing in the rain shivering and humiliated, but her brain was already calculating a new angle of attack. She would realize that dealing with me directly was a dead end. She would shift her focus toward a different target. If physical trespassing failed, she would escalate her tactics. She would rally my father and my aunt to form a united front. They would abandon personal appeals and attempt to bypass my authority entirely. They would aim for the corporate infrastructure, assuming professional decorum might force a conversation. They planned to call his private office under false pretenses, demanding immediate travel arrangements to Milan. They actually believed their blood relation granted them exclusive access to our new life. They thought we would simply yield under their combined family pressure. They were making a catastrophic miscalculation. We were scheduled to leave for the airport very soon, but the battle was far from over. The real climax was rapidly approaching, and it would occur not at our private residence, but through a secure corporate telephone line, ensuring their definitive, humiliating, permanent defeat before we departed. The morning of our departure arrived with the sharp, crisp clarity of early autumn. We stood in the kitchen verifying our travel documents. 2 black leather passports rested on the smooth marble island next to a pair of empty espresso cups. A private car was scheduled to arrive in 30 minutes to transport us to the aviation terminal. The logistics for Lake Como were flawless. We had chartered flights for our genuine friends, coordinated luxury accommodations, and finalized the catering menus. I felt a profound sense of closure. The gate incident with my mother seemed like the final desperate gasp of a dying dynasty. I underestimated their capacity for synchronized delusion. The landline mounted on the kitchen wall emitted a sharp dual-tone ring. It was not a standard household line. It was a secure corporate extension routed directly from Liam's executive suite in the city. Only 3 people possessed the clearance to bypass the automated screening protocol. One of them was Sarah. Sarah operated as Liam's chief of staff. She was a terrifyingly efficient woman who navigated corporate warfare with the precision of a surgeon. She did not panic. When Liam answered the line and placed it on the speaker setting, Sarah's voice filled the room. Her tone was a masterclass in controlled exasperation. "Mr. Bennett, I apologize for the interruption prior to your departure," she stated. "However, we experienced a security breach at the lower reception desk. A junior associate received a frantic call claiming a catastrophic medical emergency involving your wife. The associate bypassed standard holding procedures. I intercepted the transfer. It is not a medical emergency. It is a conference call originating from 3 separate residential numbers in the greater Atlanta area. The callers are demanding immediate contact regarding international travel manifests. I can terminate the connection, or I can patch them through to your current location." Liam looked at me across the kitchen island. His dark eyes remained perfectly level. The Smith family had stooped to fabricating a life-or-death crisis, manipulating a young employee just to force a conversation. They believed their shared genetic code granted them immunity from the consequences of such a severe boundary violation. Liam did not clench his jaw. He did not show a fraction of anger. He reached out and tapped the glass surface of the speakerphone. "Put them through, Sarah." He commanded, his voice barely a whisper. The line clicked. A faint burst of static echoed through the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple people breathing heavily into their receivers. The ambush was live. "Liam! Thank God!" My mother panted. Her voice projected a frantic, breathless quality designed to simulate relief. "We have been trying to reach Ava for weeks. She is being incredibly unreasonable, and we were terrified something terrible had happened." Diane did not pause to allow our response. She launched directly into her calculated pitch. "We know the vow renewal is next week in Italy. Your father and I have already checked the commercial flight schedules, but the layovers are just impossible to manage on such short notice. We assumed your office could simply arrange the transport. If you can just send the itinerary, we are packed and ready to support you both." Before the echoes of my mother's delusion could fade, a second voice cut into the frequency. It was Aunt Susan. Her tone lacked the frantic faux concern Diane utilized. Instead, Susan attempted to project the old, arrogant authority she used to wield from her country club patio. She sounded like a woman trying to command a luxury cruise liner while standing on a sinking raft. "Family sticks together, Liam," Susan declared. "We need to move past this silly historical drama. Jessica has always dreamed of seeing Lake Como, and she would love to be there to celebrate her cousin. We can consider this a fresh start for everyone. Just have your assistant email the travel vouchers." I stood frozen, staring at the blinking green light on the speakerphone console. The sheer, unadulterated greed radiating from the device was suffocating. I processed the staggering hypocrisy of their demands. 5 years ago, these exact individuals claimed a 2-hour drive across state lines was an impossible logistical hurdle. They cited exhaustion. They cited conflicting schedules. They left 74 folding chairs empty on a grassy lawn because attending my vows did not benefit their social standing. Now, staring at the prospect of a glamorous European excursion funded by a man they previously degraded, they were demanding private transatlantic aviation. They expected us to charter an aircraft for the privilege of their attendance. They did not offer a single word of genuine remorse. Their strategy relied entirely on the assumption that wealth erased memory. They thought our success softened our resolve. In their minds, my marriage was still a low-budget indie film, and they were the crucial celebrity guest stars, graciously offering to boost the ratings. They viewed Liam not as a husband or a son-in-law, but as an exclusive concierge service obligated to fulfill their travel fantasies. They were begging, but they masked the begging with a thin veneer of familial duty. The entitlement was a terminal disease. I shifted my gaze from the phone to my husband. Liam stood motionless beside the marble counter. He wore a tailored navy travel suit, his posture relaxed and deliberate. He did not mirror my internal shock. He did not raise his voice to defend my honor. An emotional reaction was exactly what my relatives desired. Anger would signal that they still held power over our nervous systems. A screaming match would validate their intrusion, giving them a foothold to negotiate. Liam was far too intelligent to provide them with that satisfaction. He operated in a realm where leverage was executed through silent, crushing bureaucracy. He looked at me and offered a single slow nod. His eyes were focused, dark, and entirely devoid of mercy. He was not going to yell. He was not going to curse at my mother or belittle my aunt. He was preparing to utilize the very corporate infrastructure they hijacked to deliver a fatal blow. The trap they set for us was about to snap shut on their own fingers, and the sound would echo across the Atlantic. The green light on the speakerphone console pulsed in the quiet kitchen. My relatives waited on the other end of the connection. They expected a negotiation. They anticipated a familiar dynamic where they issued demands and we scrambled to accommodate their desires. Liam leaned forward, resting his palms flat against the cold marble counter. He did not raise his voice. He did not express a single ounce of frustration. He utilized a tone reserved for terminating hostile corporate acquisitions. "Diane, Susan, Jessica," he said. His voice was a calm, steady baritone. "You have reached a secured corporate line. I am handing this connection over to my executive assistant." The line emitted a brief click. My family did not even have the opportunity to process his statement or interject with another plea. Sarah stepped into the frequency. Her voice flowed through the kitchen speaker like liquid nitrogen. It was polite, professional, and devastatingly cold. "Hello," Sarah stated. "Mr. Bennett has instructed me to inform you that your phone numbers have been flagged in our system for sustained harassment. Any further contact attempts directed at his office, his staff, or his private residence will result in an immediate restraining order filed by our legal department. Furthermore, a priority package was overnighted to your primary residential address this morning. Please refer to its contents for our final response. Goodbye." The speakerphone let out a sharp dial tone. The call ended. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic villain monologue recounting their sins. The conversation simply ceased to exist. Liam executed a bureaucratic guillotine. He severed their access using the very corporate infrastructure they attempted to hijack. He looked at me and offered a faint, reassuring smile. We zipped our luggage and walked out the front door toward the waiting private car, leaving their digital ghosts behind us in the empty house. 150 miles away in a cramped, dilapidated rental duplex on the outskirts of Atlanta, my mother stared at her cellular phone. The screen displayed a call-ended notification. Diane stood in a narrow hallway featuring peeling beige wallpaper and faded brown carpet. She was sharing the cramped living space with Jessica and Tom after the federal indictment stripped away their luxury lifestyles. The silence in the duplex felt suffocating. They had pooled their remaining pride to make that phone call, believing their status as blood relatives would guarantee them seats on a private jet to Milan. Instead, a nameless executive assistant had threatened them with legal action. Before Diane could formulate a new strategy, a sudden heavy thud echoed through the hallway. Something struck the exterior of the cheap hollow core front door. Heavy footsteps receded down the exterior concrete walkway. Diane rushed to the entryway and turned the brass knob. She pulled the door inward. Resting on the welcome mat was a thick cardboard envelope bearing the unmistakable purple and orange logo of a priority courier service. Her heartbeat accelerated. The stinging rejection she just experienced on the phone evaporated. Delusion rushed back into her mind, filling the void. She reached down and snatched the envelope from the rough fabric mat. She carried it into the small, dim kitchen where Tom and Jessica were sitting at a scratched laminate table. "Look!" Diane said, her voice trembling with renewed excitement. "Liam's assistant said a package was sent. This must be the travel vouchers. They are trying to scare us with the legal threats, but they sent the tickets anyway. They know they cannot exclude us from Italy." Tom leaned forward in his creaking wooden chair. Jessica took off her oversized sunglasses, her eyes wide with anticipation. They gathered around the cheap laminate surface like starving scavengers discovering a feast. Diane grabbed a pair of dull kitchen scissors from a plastic cup on the counter. She jammed the metal blades into the reinforced cardboard seam and sliced the envelope open. She tossed the scissors aside and reached inside the thick packaging. She expected to feel the glossy paper of an airline itinerary. She anticipated the crisp edge of a certified bank check meant to cover their European wardrobe expenses. Her fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. Diane frowned. She pulled the object out of the envelope and set it on the table. It was not a stack of plane tickets. It was a small rectangular wooden box. It was crafted from reclaimed walnut wood, featuring a dark green velvet lining visible through the tight seams. Liam had carved it by hand 6 years ago for our 1-year anniversary. The brass latch on the front caught the dim light of the kitchen bulb. "What is that?" Jessica asked, her voice laced with confusion. Diane did not answer. A strange, cold dread began to pool in her stomach. Her hands shook as she reached for the small brass latch. She flicked it upward. The metal mechanism clicked. She slowly opened the wooden lid. Resting inside the velvet interior was a stack of heavy cream-colored paper. Diane reached in and pulled the stack out. The gold foil lettering on the top card shimmered. It was an RSVP card. It was the exact same piece of premium stationery she had handled 5 years prior. Diane stared at the thick blue marker ink she had used to deface the card. The dark check mark sat dead center in the box labeled "Decline." She slid the top card aside. Beneath it was the response card from Uncle Richard and Aunt Susan. Decline. Beneath that was the card from Jessica. Decline. The box contained 18 original handwritten rejections from every single member of the Smith family. There was no typed letter attached. There was no handwritten note explaining the package. There was no final dramatic statement. Liam and I did not need to write a single word. We simply packaged their own arrogance and shipped it back to their doorstep. The heavy gold foil cards were the physical manifestation of their choices. They had drawn the boundary half a decade ago when they chose a birthday party over a wedding. We were simply honoring the exact parameters they established. Diane dropped the stack of cards onto the laminate table. The thick paper scattered across the scratched surface. The blue check marks stared up at the three of them, acting as an undeniable mirror reflecting their profound greed. The realization hit them with crushing finality. There would be no private jet. There would be no luxury villa in Italy. There would be no access to the Titan fortune they so desperately craved. The bridge was not just burned. It had never existed in the first place. As Diane sank into a cheap plastic kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands, a diesel engine roared to life a few miles away across town. The final phase of our departure was in motion. While my family choked on their own historical cruelty, Liam was executing a silent, permanent physical erasure of their legacy. The vow renewal in Europe was merely a beautiful distraction. The true monumental display of power was about to break ground in the exact location where their counterfeit empire originally peaked. The ultimate geographic consequence was beginning, and they were powerless to stop the demolition. The air over Lake Como tasted crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of alpine water and blooming wisteria. We stood on the grand limestone terrace of Villa del Balbianello. The afternoon sun reflected off the deep blue water, creating a surface that glittered like shattered diamonds. 5 years ago, I stood on a humid patch of grass in Alabama, wearing a second-hand dress and a broken string of clearance rack pearls. Today, the heavy silk of my custom-tailored gown brushed softly against the ancient Italian stone. There were no white folding chairs arranged in empty rows to mock me. There was no theatrical display of petty revenge. We did not ship empty seats across the Atlantic to prove a point to ghosts. Holding on to anger requires a significant amount of energy, and I no longer possessed any anger toward the people sharing a cramped duplex in Georgia. The terrace held exactly 56 seats. In the front row sat the 6 original guests who witnessed our first quiet promise. Behind them sat 50 genuine individuals. These were friends, colleagues, and industry mentors who celebrated our authentic journey rather than our financial utility. Liam wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. He did not need to fix my jewelry this time. He took both of my hands. His palms still retained the faint calluses of his trade, but his grip was the most secure anchor I had ever known. We exchanged our renewed vows under the vast open European sky. I looked at the audience and felt the profound, weightless peace of a woman who had successfully excised a terminal tumor. We kissed, and the applause that echoed across the water was rich, resonant, and entirely real. We spent the evening dancing under the stars, drinking vintage wine, and celebrating the beautiful reality we built from scratch. But the true triumph of the afternoon was not confined to the borders of Italy. The ultimate manifestation of our sovereignty was unfolding 6 time zones away in the heart of Atlanta. To understand the scale of the maneuver, you must understand the fate of the boutique hotel and country club where Jessica hosted her 30th birthday party. That sprawling, opulent property had served as the backdrop for my family's ultimate betrayal. It was the epicenter of their counterfeit high society. However, the venue suffered a catastrophic decline following the federal indictments against Uncle Richard and his network of associates. The club relied heavily on the fraudulent wealth circulating within that specific elite demographic. When the government seized the assets of its prominent members, the monthly dues evaporated. The property quickly defaulted on its commercial loans and fell into bank receivership. The grand ballroom where the jazz band played and the champagne flowed sat empty, collecting thick layers of dust. The manicured golf greens turned brown. Chain-link fences were erected around the perimeter to keep trespassers away from the decaying facade. 6 months prior to our trip, Liam initiated a quiet, highly calculated corporate acquisition using a subsidiary real estate holding company nested beneath 3 layers of anonymous corporate trusts. He purchased the distressed deed to the country club. The bank was desperate to unload the financial liability. They sold the prime commercial real estate for a fraction of its original market value. My family had no idea the deed transferred ownership to the very man they had mocked on the balcony of that exact building. Liam scheduled the final phase of the project with meticulous poetic timing. On the exact day we stood on the terrace in Italy exchanging our vows, a fleet of heavy construction vehicles rolled onto the pristine, cracked asphalt of the valet driveway in Atlanta. The roar of diesel engines shattered the quiet morning air. Bright yellow excavators and heavy-duty bulldozers positioned themselves around the perimeter of the grand colonial structure. The demolition crew did not hesitate. A heavy steel excavator bucket crashed through the ornate glass double doors of the main lobby. The structural walls of the grand ballroom collapsed inward, sending plumes of white plaster dust billowing into the Georgia sky. The exact spot on the hardwood floor where the towering ice sculpture bearing Jessica's initials once stood was reduced to crushed rubble and twisted steel rebar. The wrought iron balconies where my father smoked imported cigars were ripped from their architectural foundations and tossed into metal dumpsters. Liam did not destroy the building out of blind spite. He destroyed it to clear the land for progress. The demolition marked the official groundbreaking ceremony for the new, state-of-the-art global headquarters of Bennett Authentication. He was erasing the physical monument of my family's vanity and replacing it with the concrete foundation of our authentic success. The new facility would house high-security subterranean vaults, international appraisal suites, and a campus for the world's finest horological experts. True power does not need to scream through a telephone. It does not need to send angry emails or post performative updates on social networking applications. True power simply signs a commercial real estate contract and rearranges the city skyline. We were sipping champagne while the heavy machinery methodically chewed through the physical remnants of the Smith family delusion. The ground shook and the slate was wiped clean. The physical structure was gone, but the human consequences of their downfall remained. The dust settling over the construction site in Atlanta mirrored the harsh new reality facing my relatives. They were isolated, broke, and living in the shadow of an empire they could never touch. Yet the gears of modern American society demand participation. Jessica could not hide in the cramped duplex forever relying on her ruined parents. The trust fund was dead, and the monthly utility bills were accumulating. She was about to be forced into the unforgiving job market. She needed employment. She needed a consistent paycheck to survive. The final act of poetic justice was already in motion, waiting quietly in the corporate administrative offices of a city Liam now heavily influenced. The golden child was about to step into the unforgiving machinery of the real world, and she had no idea whose name was printed on the top of her new employment contract. The trap was set, and the final lesson in humility was imminent. The legal system operates with a cold, mechanical rhythm. My parents' bankruptcy was finalized in a sterile federal courtroom in late November. There were no cameras to capture their descent. There was no grand audience to witness their final loss of status. The judge stamped the paperwork dissolving their remaining debts by liquidating their few remaining possessions. Diane and Tom packed their meager belongings into a rented moving truck and relocated to a subsidized apartment complex in a forgotten zip code. The country club matriarch who once dictated my wardrobe now relies on government assistance to purchase groceries. Their chapter concluded with a whimpering fade into total obscurity. However, the most exquisite stroke of poetic justice belonged entirely to my cousin. For her entire existence, Jessica was shielded from consequence. She functioned as the gilded ornament of the Smith dynasty. But ornamental objects hold no value in a survival economy. When Uncle Richard's fraudulent network evaporated the protective bubble surrounding her shattered, her luxury vehicle was gone. Her trust fund was a mathematical illusion. The landlord of the cramped duplex demanded rent, and Jessica possessed zero marketable skills to generate income. Desperation is a phenomenal teacher. It forces pride into submission. Driven by the threat of eviction, Jessica swallowed her arrogance and walked into a metropolitan temporary employment agency. She traded her sequined gala gowns for a cheap, stiff polyester blazer purchased from a discount rack. The staffing agent reviewed her blank resume and placed her in the only role she qualified to perform. They assigned her a low-level data entry and reception position at a prominent commercial real estate management firm operating in downtown Atlanta. Jessica was grateful for the lifeline. She began waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to catch a public commuter bus into the city. She sat at a particle board desk positioned directly in front of a frosted glass partition. Her daily responsibilities consisted of answering multi-line telephones, filing property deeds, and routing maintenance requests. For the first time in her 35 years of life, the golden child was forced to perform menial labor for a modest hourly wage. The management firm processed hundreds of high-value leases and acquisition documents every single day. Jessica spent her first 21 days blindly typing data into sprawling digital spreadsheets. She focused on learning the complicated routing software and memorizing the names of the regional directors. The corporate hierarchy was vast and intimidating. During her 4th week on the job, she received a priority portfolio to process. It contained the blueprints and zoning permits for a new commercial headquarters being constructed on the site of a demolished country club. Jessica reviewed the cover sheet. She scanned the names of the primary investors. Then she looked up. Mounted on the frosted glass partition directly behind her desk was a heavy brushed steel corporate logo. She had walked past the metal letters every single morning without understanding their origin. She read the parent company name etched into the document header and matched it to the sign above her head, Bennett Holdings. The realization struck her with the force of a falling anvil. The high-end real estate firm that issued her meager paycheck was a subsidiary. It was a minor branch of the sprawling corporate syndicate controlled entirely by my husband. She was working for the tinkerer. The true depth of her new reality settled over her shoulders. She could not resign. She needed the medical benefits and the income to keep the electricity running in her duplex. She was trapped by her own financial ruin. Now she clocks in at 8:00 every morning to file property deeds expanding the empire she once mocked. Part of her administrative duty requires drafting formal correspondence regarding our residential properties. When she updates the security logs or files maintenance reports for our estate, she is corporately mandated to type my name. The girl who stole my wedding day is now legally forced to refer to me as Mrs. Bennett in all official company communications. Liam and I never visit that specific office. We never request to see her. We do not plot ways to humiliate her in front of her supervisors. Terminating her employment would require acknowledging her existence. Keeping her employed is the ultimate display of supreme indifference. She is simply a microscopic replaceable cog in the vast, wealthy machine we constructed. She spends 40 hours a week maintaining the foundation of our triumph. Our life continues to flourish far away from the wreckage of their choices. My copywriting agency secures unprecedented contracts. Liam's authentication firm dictates the global market. Our glass estate remains a sanctuary. We spend our evenings sitting on the travertine veranda, drinking wine and listening to the wind rustle through the surrounding oak trees. Our home is a fortress of profound, enduring peace. The air is clean because the toxic elements were permanently extracted. If you are listening to this story right now, I want you to pay close attention. Perhaps you are the one sitting in the empty row. Maybe you are staring at a vacant chair, waiting for people who consistently treat your milestones as optional inconveniences. Perhaps you possess a family that demands your loyalty while offering you nothing but scraps from their table. Hear this truth. Stop lowering your drawbridge for people who refuse to build a boat. Your value is not determined by their inability to recognize your worth. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into their flawed narrative. You are allowed to walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. The most lavish, beautiful life you can possibly build begins the exact moment you stop begging for crumbs. It starts the second you realize the trash simply took itself out. Do not chase them. Do not offer them another chance to break your spirit. Keep your peace. Keep your receipts, and never let them back at your table. Take care of yourself. The image of 74 empty folding chairs on a perfectly manicured lawn is not just a scene of personal heartbreak. It is a terrifying, unflinching mirror held up to the modern American family. In a culture that increasingly equates success with the right zip codes, the right cars, and the right social calendars, the story of Ava and Liam forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question. When did we start loving the illusion of our families more than the human beings actually in them? This profound cautionary tale serves as a vital warning regarding the erosion of family values in the face of materialism and social posturing. It asks us to look at the foundations of our own homes and decide what we are truly building. For parents especially, those navigating the high-pressure social landscapes of modern America. The story highlights the extreme danger of prioritizing optics over authentic connection. The Smith family's so-called economy was not built on unconditional love or mutual support. It was constructed entirely on the illusion of wealth and social status, heavily symbolized by exclusive country club memberships and luxury cars. When a mother and father prioritize their social standing, choosing to attend Jessica's Gatsby-themed party over the sacred milestones of their own daughter, they forfeit their moral authority. Worse, they forfeit the long-term loyalty of their family. Parenting requires an unwavering commitment to fairness and emotional awareness. When we show our children that our love is conditional based on who is watching or what we have to gain, we fracture their spirits. Furthermore, the narrative exposes the deep, rotting poison of financial dependency. Diane and Tom's reliance on Uncle Richard's checks meant that their souls were leased. This financial tether became a moral chain, forcing them to treat their own daughter as completely optional simply to appease their wealthy benefactor. The message here is clear and urgent. For any traditional family, financial independence is a prerequisite for moral integrity within a family. You cannot raise children with honesty and fairness if your own loyalties are easily bought and sold. We also must evaluate how we guide our children to view success. The Smith family looked at Ava's husband Liam and dismissed him as a worthless tinkerer simply because he worked with his hands instead of sitting in a corner office. They judged his worth by his outward appearance. Yet it was Liam's authentic skill and infinite patience that eventually built a real, unshakable empire. In stark contrast, the family's counterfeit wealth, which was built on nothing but debt and fraud, eventually imploded. Parents must learn to value the character and craftsmanship of their children's choices rather than holding out for immediate surface-level shine. A family built on transactional loyalty is like a replica watch without a foundation of authentic gears. It is ultimately destined to grind itself to dust. We must teach our children that true lasting success is born of integrity, not performance. For young people stepping into the complexities of adulthood, Ava and Liam's journey offers a masterclass in building an internal fortress. There is a powerful lesson to be learned in emotional sovereignty. Your self-worth is not a vote. Ava's realization that her value was not determined by her family's empty chairs is the turning point of her life. Young people are powerfully encouraged to stop begging for crumbs of affection from those who do not see their worth. You must realize that you do not need a crowd to validate your sacred promises. While the golden child Jessica relied heavily on a trust fund that eventually vanished into thin air, Ava and Liam succeeded through sheer hard work and honest labor. Their story advocates beautifully for a quiet ascent, building a life of true value in the shadows through skill and dedication rather than chasing a performative social media presence. In an age where everything is broadcast, there is immense power in mastering your craft silently and letting your success make the noise. But perhaps the most challenging lesson of all revolves around the boundaries we set to protect that quiet ascent. Ava's decision to sever the cord and block her family was not an act of malice, but rather an essential act of self-preservation. In a culture that often pressures individuals to forgive and forget, regardless of the harm caused, Ava's receipts folder serves as a poignant reminder that accountability is necessary for justice. Keeping a record of the truth ensures that one is never tempted to believe their future lies. Her message to young people navigating toxic dynamics is resolute. Stop lowering the drawbridge for people who refuse to build a boat. Protecting your peace and your new family often requires a bureaucratic guillotine to excise toxic influences permanently. Ultimately, this story contrasts two types of traditional family structures. One based on a hollow transactional loyalty, where Aunt Susan's word was law because she held the checkbook, and another based on authentic partnership, where Ava and Liam built a fortress of peace. It serves as a reminder that a truly traditional education must focus on behavioral ethics, the value of labor, and genuine emotional connection. If you found yourself nodding along to this narrative, if you have ever felt the sting of an empty chair, or if you are currently navigating the heavy waters of family boundaries, we invite you to join our community. Please follow the channel Sophia Vengeance for more deeply resonant, true-to-life narratives that explore the beautiful, messy, and triumphant aspects of the human experience. We share stories that empower you to reclaim your narrative. As you close this page and return to the quiet realities of your own life, take a moment to look closely at the table you are setting for your own family. We spend so much of our lives aching for the people who never showed up, mourning the spaces they left behind. But perhaps we have been looking at it all wrong. If you stare long enough at the empty chair in your own life, you might just realize something profound. Is the empty seat a tragedy of abandonment? Or is it perhaps the most merciful rescue you never knew you needed?